With practice, it quickly becomes easy to mix up secondary and tertiary colours, but evaluating tints and shades of desaturated colours is another matter altogether. The key to understanding how to mix up any colour at all is first to figure out where the colour is in the three-dimensional model. To do this, there are three things we need to know about the colour. We need to know its hue, its value, and degree of saturation. For example, this is Winsor & Newton raw sienna. Let's find out where it belongs in the colour model. First, we need to establish hue. It's yellow in hue, but has a slight red bias, which places it between yellow and yellow-orange. Next, we evaluate value, and in the case of raw sienna, it's perhaps slightly darker than pure yellow, which makes it a shade. Lastly, we evaluate saturation. Compared to pure yellow, raw sienna is somewhat desaturated, so we move it in towards the centre until it harmonises with the colours around it. Now that we know where raw sienna is in the 3D model, we can find its complementary. It's a desaturated blue-violet, and when we mix blue-violet with raw sienna, grey is the result. Knowing where it is in the three-dimensional model also means that we can mix up a colour approximating raw sienna from pure colours. Here I have used Winsor yellow with a little Winsor violet and bright red. To really get to know the colours in your colour box, it's a good idea to make some charts showing tints and mixtures. Watercolour is a recommended medium for these, as it's easy to create tints by adding water, and the colours don't change too much when they dry. First, draw a grid on a piece of watercolour paper. This one is ruled with 1.5 cm squares, but you can make them any size and draw them freehand if you prefer. You can use any colours you like, but we're using permanent rose and will be mixing it with new gamboge and emerald green. First, mix quite a lot of water with the permanent rose, blending it into tints across the plate. Then count 5 squares across and 5 up, and paint this square with the pure colour. There should be just enough water in the paint to make it fluid, about the consistency of thin cream. Leave some white space between the squares. The colours will look better if they're not abutting, and you can paint them successively without them bleeding into one another. For the next square, add more water to the rose, making it a tint, just a little lighter in value than the first colour. Then with each successive square, thinner and thinner colour is used until the 5th square is the palest of tints. The new gamboge is painted in exactly the same manner, leaving 3 squares between the two colours. Now add new gamboge to the rose plate and mix them together. In this case, the rose is the stronger pigment, so you have to be careful it doesn't overwhelm the yellow. Then mix the two colours together, looking for the orange, which is halfway between. It takes practice to find precisely the right colour, but it really doesn't matter if it's not accurate. This orange is now added to the chart at full strength in the middle column. Then look for the red-orange that falls between the orange and the rose, and paint it between the two colours. In the same way, the yellow-orange is added to the chart. Then paint in the orange tints. The red-orange tints. And finally the yellow-orange tints. The end result is a chart showing the colours available by mixing permanent rose with new gamboge. Note that permanent rose has a blue bias and new gamboge a red bias. So even though our oranges look good, they would be purer if we replaced the rose with bright red or vermilion, as these colours have a yellow bias. This can be seen on this chart, which compares the oranges from New Gamboge and Bright Red and New Gamboge and Permanent Rose. The bright red oranges are a little clearer. Now let's see what happens when we mix Permanent Rose with its complementary, in this case emerald green. The green and its tints have been painted to the right of the rose, leaving 3 spaces in between. Now let's see if we can find a neutral grey. The green is very pure, but the rose is a much stronger pigment and will quickly overwhelm it, so it takes more green than rose to achieve the neutral colour. The fact that we have found a neutral grey proves that these colours are exact complementaries. If Permanent Sap Green had been mixed with Permanent Rose, this would not have been achievable, as they aren't exact complementaries, and the mix wouldn't have passed through the middle of the colour wheel. Now that the neutral colour has been found, it's added to the chart. Now mix more rose into the grey and place it between the 2 colours. And in the same way add the colour between the grey and the green. More water is added to these colours to create the tints. Paint them in and the chart is almost complete. When the chart is dry, you can erase the pencil lines and write in the names of the colours. The end result is a map of the mixes and tints available from Permanent Rose with New Gamboge and Winsor Emerald. If you wanted to add shades to the chart, you would need to extend the mixtures by adding black. A great deal is to be gained by making as many of these charts as you can. Try using colours that you wouldn't normally think of mixing, yellow and violet perhaps. Keep the charts in a binder and refer to them in the course of your work. You can be sure that they will prove to be an invaluable resource. No matter what medium you use, a well-organised palette will really help you get good results. For watercolour painting, you should use either a white ceramic or an enamel plate. These surfaces allow the colour to spread, giving you a good idea of how the colour will look on paper. Plastic palettes repel water and the colour forms into droplets, and it looks darker than it actually is. This results in wishy-washy paintings. Your choice of colours will depend on your subject matter. In general, however, it's best to place analogous colours side by side. For a cool palette, start with Cadmium Yellow Pale, then Permanent Sap Green, Viridian, Winsor Blue, French Ultramarine, and Permanent Rose. On the other side of the plate, place some raw sienna, burnt sienna, and sepia. As you can see, these colours mix very clearly. The earth colours are used to desaturate the pure colours, and the sepia will make them into shades. Sepia and French Ultramarine also make an excellent black. On paper, it's easy to see how the colours blend nicely together. The reason is that by placing analogous colours side by side, the risk of mixing muddy colours is greatly reduced. For a warm palette, again start with Cadmium Yellow Pale, then New Gamboge, Cadmium Red, Permanent Rose, Dioxazine Violet, and French Ultramarine. Once again, the earth colours go on the other side of the plate and are useful for desaturating colour and making shades. The colours used in these examples are only suggestions and can be replaced by any colours you like. The main thing is to have analogous colours side by side to get the clearest mixtures. Keep the colours on the rim and mix them into and across the surface of the plate. This makes it easy to see the colour modulating. In this example, you can see a mixture of French ultramarine, permanent rose and sepia. Notice how the colours modulate in terms of their hue, value, saturation and temperature. Avoid mixing flat, even-looking colours. It's much better to allow modulation to occur. You can see this when a flat mixture of these three colours is compared with a modulated mixture. Even very subtle changes of value can liven up a surface, and changes in temperature will help to make neutral colours really stand out. In summary, getting to know the bias of your colours will help you set up your palette. Then, by making as many colour charts as you can, you'll get a really good understanding and a record of the available mixtures.